Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Taco Movie Talks. I am joined here with our good friend Matthew, aka Warchamp, whose Letterboxd you should check out down below. And also be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content. We have a special video, and this is definitely right within Matthew's wheelhouse, and that is French New Wave with a focus on maybe one of the most influential directors for the movement, and that is Jean-Luc Godard. Matthew, how are you? And I guess, how did you get into French New Wave? And how did you get introduced to Jean-Luc?
I'm doing well, thank you. And so I first got introduced to him. It was back a few years ago when I was first getting more into movies in general, and I saw a lot of people talking about French New Wave, and I didn't really know what it was. And there was a lot of like polarizing opinions. Some people like really liked it, and some people just thought a lot of the movies were stupid, I guess. But I thought it sounded interesting, and I really hadn't seen many French films before. And Godard was considered, from what I was reading, like kind of the guy that maybe people say The 400 Blows is the first movie, but people also say that Godard is kind of the face of the French New Wave, and Breathless is the true first French New Wave movie. So there's a debate there, but he's kind of the figurehead of the movement, I guess you could say. Even though there's multiple directors, French directors, most of them critics, people mostly think, I would say, of him when they think of French New Wave.
Yeah, for sure. And there's definitely, I think, a lot of talent that continued the movement and progressed the movement. But I think Jean-Luc, I mean, if you look, he has some very, very high quality films that, are probably staples of what is considered French New Wave. And I have to admit, Matt, I think you were really the first person who put this cinema movement on my radar, because I had, kind of seen films recommended, highly rated, without knowing that they were a part of this. And you were a huge advocate as far as, saying this is something to check out. And I'm glad I did, because all of my preconceptions, I think, turned out to be misconceptions, because the quality of the two movies we're going to talk about, I thought, were very, very good.
Yeah, and if you like those two, or if you like the ones we're going to talk about, you will probably like the other, like what people would. There's like a whole list of directors people consider French New Wave. You'd probably like their movies as well, and I can, talk about those later if you want, so, like for little recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, this probably isn't breaking news to fans of the movement, but I think people who are just hearing about it, I mean, a lot of what is brought on with this movement is seen in movies today. I think it helped inspire a lot of the great directors. I think it really helped kind of push the medium forward. I mean, how do you feel about that, Matt? And I mean, I'm sure you would agree. You see some of the things that are created and shown in these movies, 60 years after the fact.
Yeah. So like the common kind of story, how the story goes, I guess you could say, is like this, and it is true because I've actually watched a lot of classic movies lately, and I started noticing it more, like for like classic being like 30s, 40s 50s, like before the French New Wave, there was a kind of a set. Uh, People would say like rules. So like kind of how music theory sets the rules of music, but people still break them, and the music can still sound amazing. It's the same kind of way with what Godard did in Breathless. He like all the technical rules. The best way to give an example to explain it would be the conversations that the characters have. So you're very used, or you're very used to seeing in most films like an over the shot, um, like shot angle of the shoulder
Mm.
when two people are talking, for example, or it flips back from one face and one character to the next. And in this, like I like one of the first thing I noticed on my rewatch of like Breathless and Vivre, or My Life to Live is that like in Breathless, like there's a huge like a ton of dialogue just being said by the by Pauline, or I'm sorry, Patricia, I think her name is, the American girl, and it's jump cutting all around as she talks in the car, and it doesn't change. It's just like you see the back of her head, and it doesn't change shots. When normally when the other person's talking, it flips back and forth. And the same thing in Vivre to be like there's the whole opening 5, 6, I forgot how long it lasts, minutes where the conversation that she's having with the guy, it's just like you see both of them in the mirror, and you just see the back of their heads in the shot. So like the camera wavers around and lingers on people, and it seems random in the way it's positioned. So it's like he started using these different filming techniques, and he also basically created a movie that didn't have much of a plot. It was kind of just more about the style and the references that he has in the movie. And it ends up, in some ways, the first time I watched it, it felt like I was listening to like some kind of lecture essay in a weird way, like stylishly filmed. Because he just has those triads that people go on about, like philosophy and literature and stuff. And sometimes you're just like, what am I supposed to get out of this?
No, I see where you're coming from, and you brought up so many good points and a lot of parallels, like you said, with music. And it's kind of crazy to think that in film there was a movement that was really kind of breaking the roles in quotation marks, and I think this is around this same time period is when you start to see like more experimental musicians, or not musicians, but bands, even very popular established bands, try more experimental. And I think, Jean-Luc Godard, and what makes him so brilliant was by breaking these rules, it almost forces you to focus on things like the dialogue. Like how you said, I think it's My Life to Live. How you're at the back of the head of the characters during the conversation. It's so unnatural. You're not really used to seeing that in cinema, and it kind of has an effect that it draws you into the dialogue. It's almost like, have you ever heard the expression, it's like a person who yells all the time? You'll start to kind of just tune them out. But if someone,
Yeah.
they whisper, and it's like, it almost makes you like want to, like, oh, everyone be quiet. I want to hear what this person's saying. You know what I mean? It had that effect on me, where it drew me into the dialogue, and it instantly had me hooked, just because it's so different, and you want to see like what this is all about.
Yeah. It makes you also focus more on the dialogue, I think, because in a way, like you don't see the internal thoughts of the character. It's kind of all just this external talking, and
Mm-hmm.
they just kind of they don't really talk about. It's hard to empathize with the characters. So like especially in like Vivre or My Life to Live, you like you see her falling into like doing more prostitution, but you don't really feel bad for her because the dialogue he has them say, like even when she's talking to the people that are, I guess she's her clients and stuff, like they just talk about like literature, art references, like funny, random things. I almost found it all to be a little silly when I rewatched it, like kind of goofy a lot of it, but at the same time, like it makes you focus more on what's being said. And I think almost all of it, when I was looking into more about what all of it meant, it's a lot of just things that are very personal to Godard. It's just like books he really likes, or like a philosopher he really enjoys reading, or a movie he loves. He'll reference it in some way in the movie, and it all seems kind of like he's making it for himself in a way, but he's also, it also draws people into it, and he's trying to, I think, make the audience more of an active, intellectual type of thinker than most of the movies that are just kind of like an escape. Which, I mean, I love movies for that reason, for them to be an escape. But when I watch a Godard movie, I know that that's not going to happen. I'm not going to be rewarded in that same
That that's a very, that's an astute criticism. I feel like a slice of life is a good description, I think. Definitely a different type of life. But I want to ask, and this might be a harder hitting question, not necessarily indicative of my beliefs, but when you peruse Letterboxd, one of the, and I don't even know, criticisms is, and I want to hear your take on this, Matt, is that some people kind of find Godard to be a bit misogynistic in his portrayals of women. And I kind of, because you have much more experience in his movies, do you find that to be the case? Or do you think perhaps it is him making, I guess, kind of a commentary on the times? What's your take on that?
Well, I do know that like as a person, he's, I think, had some. I don't know too much about that because I haven't read that much about it, but I think there's been some, not like career-ending accusations, but just that he's kind of like a womanizer or stuff like that as a individual.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for his movies, I haven't. I don't know too much about the criticism. I haven't seen it, and haven't really seen what people say to it. But if I had to guess, it seems like he would be commenting on the times, because a lot, especially of his later stuff, is just him kind of being upset at the system in the country, and trying to, but he definitely seemed to have some, like his, like the main character, the main actress in My Life to Live, Anna Karina, like that was, how directors often like have like muses, they'll call them, and a lot of times it's kind of a weird, it ends up being this weird thing where the actress afterwards is like, yeah, he was pretty creepy and I didn't really want to, but at the same, but I did it, I want to be in his movies, but usually, I don't know, it just seems like Anna Karina and other people might have had a bad taste in their mouth after working with, like a bad feeling about him. But I think Anna Karina was even married to him. I don't know a lot of the personal stuff, but if I had to guess, I think he just might have used to have that vibe about him.
Yeah. And so just a preface, the two movies that we're going to be covering are very much in the beginning stages of Jean-Luc Godard's established movie run. And you were telling me he's still alive, and I was shocked because the first movie we're going to talk about, Breathless, came out in 1960, and that is 62 years ago. And Jean-Luc Godard, at the ripe old age of 91, is still kicking around. But I think the last movie he directed came out in 2018, which is just absolutely insane to kind of wrap your mind around the longevity of his career.
Yeah, and funnily enough, I absolutely love the Image book, and it's one of my favorite movies from him. But it's he has so many different kinds of movies. It's kind of like he has some very political movies, and he has like movies like History of Cinema and the Image book and Goodbye to Language that are like very much kind of spliced together clips with kind of like an over, kind of like a voiceover, I guess, and a lot of it. I mean, there's dialogue in it too, but almost all of it is just not all of it is references, but like it's you don't get it as much unless you've seen all of his movies, which I haven't seen all of them, and a lot of other French movies, because a lot of what he puts in there are his movies too. And I noticed that after watching it again. So it's footage that he just has, and he kind of just puts it all together and just kind of writes it. It's kind of like an essay, and it's a very interesting, different kind of movie for him. So he's extremely versatile, and I'm also surprised he is still around. And because actually the main guy, Paul, I forgot to say his last name. It's Bernardo or something like that, who plays Michelle and Michael or whatever they call him, in Breathless, died last year. So, and he looked younger than Godard in 1960. So I'm not really. He's lived a very long life, kind of outliving his cast even, which is surprising. But
You don't see that often at all. But you mentioned the movie Breathless, and going in chronological order. I'd like to start there with, just a quick synopsis. And like you said, Michelle is the leading man, and he ends up killing a French patrolman or police officer, is being pretty elusive, and meets up with an American woman, like you said, who is a New York Herald paper saleswoman, and they almost seem to kind of rekindle a little bit of a relationship. Our main character, Michael, is trying to kind of break down her defenses. And then we get to a situation where she is interrogated, finds out the crime that he committed, and she kind of wavers between sticking by his side and then turning him in, and leads to a very, very dramatic ending for sure. What were your thoughts on this film? And I guess let's start there. What were your initial thoughts with Breathless?
Well, when I first saw it, I remember I was just kind of like I hadn't seen that many movies, so I didn't get all the references. I mean, I had seen enough to know what the French New Wave was, but if you're just, starting out watching movies, or you're just getting into watching more art house, what people call art house movies, then you won't get everything, probably all the references in his movies, because he has so many, and it's also not just movies; it's literature and other things. But when I first saw it, I remember I was just kind of, I guess, taken aback, kind of shocked. I was like, what? I haven't really seen anything like this. And then you kind of realize that a lot of the things you have seen are kind of come from this, because this is in 1960, and a lot of the movies today, if they know it or not, are using strategies developed in this. Like, this was one of the first times a movie was shot that was ever using, or that was used natural light, and it was a super small budget, and they shot on location. I mean, I noticed this on the my second watch, that people, when they were walking on the street, there didn't seem to be extras because they were all looking back at the actors as they walked by, all the random people on the street. So it was a very low budget, and this is one of those movies where it blew up, and I guess you might not have expected it from something that was made so cheaply. But what they did with the camera and how they oriented everything, and the decisions they made, it was so creative, and it ended up being revolutionary for the whole art form.
Yeah, I think the way that it blends genres too, as far as there being a romantic plot and also the crime aspect is done superbly. Where I was kind of interested in both plots. I mean, I do occasionally enjoy, romance movies. But this one, it really drew my attention, and to the point where I think the beginning, obviously with the murder of the policeman, and then where the chase kind of starts to progress, you could say action-wise, those had the most going on, but I felt like the conversation between our leading man and our leading woman in the household of the American paper saleswoman was the highlight of the film for me, just because the dialogue was so strong during that part of the film. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I remember that from my first. I remember that scene from my initial watch when I was watching it, and I was like, "When is the scene of them in the room gonna happen?" Because it lasts like. I remember how long it lasted. I remember me noticing like, "Oh my gosh, this is how are they still in this apartment?" And so I think I timed it this time, but I got it. It was like around 25-ish minutes.
Oh my
That's like
gosh.
almost a third of the movie of them in the apartment. But that is like kind of a big, that's like, it's such a typical Godard thing to just like have them linger in one spot. And I think a lot of it was he shot a lot of footage, and he had a lot of like the actors improvise a lot, I think. And he ended up shooting so much stuff that he had to cut a lot of it down, and that's where a lot of the jump cuts, like all the jump cuts that are all over the place, come from. And I think he might have just really liked the dialogue that was and how the actors were doing in that scene, because a lot of it is just like seems like a single shot or like a really long take, and then they kind of cut the middles of it out to reduce the time, and that's why it jumps around so much. But it's just kind of them, arguing, talking, doing like goofy stuff, saying, and then just kind of just like having a real sounding conversation in a way that's not really moving any sort of plot forward. And it's kind of, and at least up until that point, no one was used to seeing that kind of thing in a movie. So that it was super, different. And I think some people, and, I think that might have been the case, is all that kind of was some perfect accident, and that's how a lot of really good things in art are made. And Godard was a critic, so he knew what he was doing. Like, he loved film noir and romance movies that were from America, so he knew how to put that in. But I think the way it turned out was not expected by a lot of them. Probably it was probably like like a video that goes viral nowadays. A lot of times they don't expect it, but it just happens.
Yeah, exactly. And you brought up a really good point, Jean-Luc Godard's background. And, sometimes you wouldn't expect a critic to be able kind of to deliver the goods that they they often criticize great works of art, and then when they, you kind of expect, oh, if they were to try it themselves, they would struggle with it. But just the way that he was kind of pushing the needle and deciding to not go the safe kind of linear route is what makes this, I think, a timeless classic. Because, like you said, it's not quite pushing the plot forward. I mean, that primarily takes place in the beginning and in the end. But that middle section gives you such a deep appreciation for the characters, and it lets these two. And I would love to see more work that John Seberg and John Paul Belmondo are in. I guess Gene, and it's not John. But anywho, I would love to see more work that they're in, because they were absolutely top notch, and that section is just picture proof of that statement, I think.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember if he uses the actress in more films or not. But in My Life to Live, that actress, Anna Karina, is in a lot of his movies. And Jean Paul Bernardo, I might not be saying that right, is also in at least one other. I think he might be in more, but he's in Perry at Le Fou, which is a lot like this movie. But yeah, I guess Godard kind of chose a lot of people initially for his first films, and he just continues to reuse them in other stuff. Like especially the main character in My Life to Live. She appears in a lot of his things. And again, I don't know if that's just because he thinks she's attractive but she's also a really good actress. Um, so it's probably maybe a mix of both for him.
Yeah, and I mean, you see that recur time and time again with these kind of auteurs who have their acting troupe that they like to keep, probably because they know how to communicate what 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 action they want to take place. But it's really impressive. I don't believe this is Jean-Luc Godard's debut, but I think you had mentioned this was the one that really helped bring a lot of attention to him as a director, and I can see why, because there's a lot of very distinct choices he makes, and there's a lot of cinematic gold that is in this film.
Yeah, and this is just it's one of those movies that, like you said, it's a timeless classic because it kind of kicked off, a lot of things that became popular in movies, like movies, like even Taxi Driver, like Pulp Fiction. They're like a mix of they're a lot of times they're walking around the way they're. I mean, because I know Tarantino is a huge fan of Godard and the French New Wave movement. And Scorsese is a lot of almost every director seems to be a pretty big fan and take inspiration from French New Wave. And when they say that, a lot of times they're referring to probably the first movie they watched in the French New Wave was either The 400 Blows or Breathless. And it's important to also mention that there's a lot of other directors involved, and they were kind of all critics. So like Truffaut, Godard, Rivette, and I forget the last. Oh, I don't think it was Eric Romer, but there's I forget who the fourth one is. Oh, Chabrol maybe. There's a bunch of different French critics who all turned into directors, and they all ended up being pretty successful. Um, and they all also loved American movies, and they all kind of wanted to, and they knew them extremely well, so they knew the rules well, and they knew they could break them, if they did it the right way. And they all kind of have their own unique takes on French New Wave, but it kind of all starts with Breathless, I guess you could say. So it's just an extreme, it's just a landmark in film history, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. without an understanding of the rules, I think, and this isn't something that I can speak from with experience, but knowing why the rules are put in place, which was kind of what you said, it allowed them to know how to break the rules and kind of have a positive impact by doing so. And you stated earlier, you were talking about the jump cuts. That is definitely visually one of the first things, or the thing that will stick out most watching Breathless. It's very frequent, and I guess what was your take from that? Was it jolting to see that in a movie, or did you kind of know going in that was going to occur? And I guess, do you think that helped benefit the film?
In the end, I think it did help benefit, for sure. Going in, I didn't expect it, but also when I saw it, it's become so much more popular to do stuff like that. So like normally when they would cut in like a normal, on a set for a movie that's kind of filmed in the standard way, they might cut any time, and they would hold continuity. So like if someone's walking into a house, they're not gonna cut from when they're outside to all of a sudden them being in the house doing something else. They're gonna follow them all the way into the house, into the door, and it's gonna cut as they're going in. If that's important, if they're
Mm-hmm.
like the protagonist moving the plot forward in some way. And instead, this movie kind of it randomly cuts, and I think that might have been part of the. I don't know if that was ever intended, but I think Godard might have liked that style, and it could have been what he was going for. But I also, I did read about how he had to cut footage out because he filmed too much, but he did it in a way that no one else did. Most people would cut out the end or the beginning, then he kind of cut in the middle. So it's very, it it's definitely something I've seen before. So, like I said, I'm more used to it, and it's not revolutionary because we're not in 1960 anymore. But looking back and watching it the second time, I could definitely appreciate it, and it was more apparent to me what was happening and why it was important.
Yeah, I completely agree. Um, I
And I
Go
just
ahead.
wanted to mention the super iconic jump cut in My Life to Live with the machine gun. If you remember that part, where every
Oh
time the
yeah,
machine gun is going off, it cuts, and that's something people always talk about. And I think that's definitely intended and extremely creative. And I always thought that was a really funny, kind of goofy, interesting part.
oh yeah, definitely. That was like a really impactful scene. Um, with the kind of the ending, how Gene Seberg's character kind of turns on Jean Paul Belmondo's character and turns him in, and makes a statement about love. Thematically, how did you kind of interpret that? And I guess, did you like the ending, and did you feel like it was very impactful for you?
Well, when I first saw the ending to this and My Life to Live, those were both some of the first Godard movies I saw, and so it was a little abrupt and shocking.
Mm-hmm.
The endings are usually like that, and they happen within like a minute or two usually. But then as I saw more of his movies, I got used to that because he does it all the time, and I realized he might be trying to like say something with the way he does this. He seems to be like, to me at least, kind of showing people that the action scene or the plot isn't that important. Maybe because, like, for example, all we see is in Breathless them just fire the gun once, and then it just cuts to him, running down the street after he's got shot, and then he's he's on the ground and he's still smoking a cigarette. It seems goofy and kind of like he's making fun of the seriousness that people take when they're making action movies, and he's kind of just saying, I guess screw this. We're just gonna make this part super simple and short and like insignificant. And I don't know why he does that, but it kind of goes along with this whole rebellious aspect of the movie too.
That definitely tracks because the endings, like you said, are you would with how thoughtful the movie is. It's kind of throughout it. I guess you would expect him to have a quasi convoluted ending that is just like completely mind bending, and it takes it to a place where you're like, oh, like maybe it ties some loose end. But yeah, the way that by kind of both movies end are very abrupt, almost bordering on melodramatic or over dramatic. And I'm not, when you say that, it definitely makes a lot of sense that the way he does his endings are almost based in commentary in the way that they're done.
Yeah, yeah. To me it's so like you were saying earlier how the dialogue kind of draws you in. A lot of the choices that are made kind of also like in a different way they take me out of the movie in the sense that I realize I'm watching a movie, and a lot of people, or a lot of movies aren't like that, and they're not supposed to be. But his are, and almost always, and if it's some, a character starts spewing a lot of philosophical dialogue all at once, and I have to read all the subtitles and try and figure out what it means. That or a scene, the endings where people just kind of die in the last 3 minutes, and then it's like the end. Both those things, you just kind of like, it kind of makes me like step back and be like, what just happened? But I think that is kind of what he's intending. He doesn't really want us to empathize and like fall in love with the characters. Like a lot of movies, that's you have to have that in order for the movie to work.
Yeah. And I think that kind of strengthens the point that you were making earlier, in that, you know, the leading man, Michelle, in this does kind of have he's very apathetic when it comes to, it's strange. He has a very complicated relationship with this woman where he seems very blasé, but also is like almost, he's in love with her at the same time, and kind of he is it's a fine balance between both of these emotions, but it can be kind of looked at the way that he talks to the woman. It might be just adding fuel to the fire of the criticism that he's trying to make. And like you said, he doesn't want you to fall in love with these characters because they are flawed in ways, and that goes for kind of both of the characters. So it's like, and he makes it very apparent that they're flawed, and then, with how they kind of meet their end, it's like, don't worship these movie stars or this character, because I just kind of showed you how flawed they are. Do you find any kind of relevance to that statement, or how do you
Yeah,
feel?
that's a good point that I wasn't thinking about them being flawed actually, but no, I agree because I think a character in shows or movies where the character is built for you to care about their actions and what they do, because usually it's like you relate to them, and
Mm-hmm.
it can be a movie even from a different country or some. It doesn't matter, that usually you can find something to relate to them on some level, and that's usually what prompts you to like certain people more, and in turn that makes a lot of people love the celebrities that themselves that play the characters. But in this case, the characters just kind of like when he's having a dialogue with her in the apartment, for example. You said was your favorite part. Uh, like he's basically like worried the entire time about who she slept with and all this stuff, and it's like half the stuff he's talking about is that, and then a lot of times like this scene or this part I really like. She puts her head next to the painting and she's like, "Oh, am I as pretty as the painting?" and stuff like that. So she is also insecure, but you don't really get to see like their inner thoughts that much because they're just kind of spewing dialogue the entire time,
Mm-hmm.
and the camera is just kind of randomly cutting to different places or panning randomly. And then another thing he does that he does in all his films really well is like characters will kind of have many little theme songs. So like in the Breathless one, like when the male protagonist is talking, it will like play that little jet, that kind of James Bondish sounding
Mm.
spy jazzy like noir type of music, and then it plays kind of a different one when American Girl starts talking. It's the same kind of style, but he brings it in and then he'll cut it out randomly, and then he'll kind of the editing is just it's extremely noticeable, and
Mm.
and it's kind of meant, I guess would say, in other films to not be noticeable. You're supposed to just get lost in the movie, and in this way the flawed characters, the dialogue, the editing all kind of works together to, I guess, I don't want to say take you out, because you could still, I was super into the movie, even like the second time when I rewatched both of them. So I don't wouldn't say it's taken out. It piqued my interest even more, but his whole intention, I think, is just to just completely destroy the rules that were set and what people's intentions are for movies. And yeah, it worked really well.
Yeah, and I'm trying to, I guess, come to a conclusion about what the intent was, because the decisions, I do think overall, I mean, this was a movie I really enjoyed. I really like this movie and the next movie we're going to talk about. But I do wonder why he made those decisions, because like you said, I'm trying to like find the verbiage to really, maybe nail it down, but it reminds you of the fact that you're being entertained, you know? And I,
Yeah.
I mean, do you have, I guess, any theory as to why you think he made multiple choices that try to accomplish this?
Um, I can't, I don't know why for sure. I haven't read books on him, or I've read, I've watched the different commentary extras and stuff like that. And one thing that's mentioned a lot, and this is just kind of something I learned rather recently, is that there's this playwriter that he really enjoyed, his last name was Brecht, and he kind of he had the same intentions for his plays. He would make his characters the same kind of way as Godard did, hard to empathize with. Uh, you know, uh, Kind of brings out the fact that you're watching a play, just like he brings out the fact that you're watching a movie. You know, as stuff we've talked about before, and even more so things like uh, when the characters just look directly into the camera, and they call that breaking the fourth wall. So I think he, in a way, and this holds true just based on his career and what he did in the future, is that he wants an audience to be like critical observers, and he wants to challenge the audience and make them aware that they're watching a movie, and put a focus on the actual actions the characters are taking in the movie instead of thinking about what the characters are feeling. I guess he just kind of shows what's happening, and I don't know, that's kind of that's not there's no really conclusion to that, but I guess that's just another point of maybe why he did things the way he did. That's another inspiration for him.
Yeah, that definitely does add a nuance to it, and that could very likely be the inspiration for him to do that. I guess just one final question, and then we'll go into final thoughts. And this one might be difficult because myself, I was trying to think what my answer would be, and I was kind of struggling. But if I were to say you could define or boil down Michelle's character as a narcissist, how would you describe his counterpart, the American newspaper woman?
Well, that is a good question. I mean, to me, it's weird because the whole time, and this is I think part of what he's challenging people to think about, is that she just kind of puts up with all his crap and just banters with him. Um, so people are attracted to the type of people like his character, like Michelle's character, all the time. They they may be they may be like self-centered, but he's exciting, and he just
Mm.
kind of does things impulsively, and that's that's exciting for a lot of people. And I don't know if I would describe her a specific way as just kind of being. She seems independent. She's over in France by herself for America, selling like a New York newspaper, which I think is interesting. But I think the characters might also stand for, this is another just interpretation. They might stand for things like Godard loves America, so here we have an American woman who might be a journalist selling newspapers, and Godard wanted the movie to look like. I remember, I think the cinematographer. It was an interview with the cinematographer. Maybe he said he wanted the movie to look like footage from a newspaper or something like that. So
Oh.
that was part of his intent. Yeah, that was part of his intention of the way he filmed it. So it could be. It's very hard to know with him because he has so much symbolic representations that he just kind of that you don't even have to look for them because he makes them so apparent. Like people
Mm-hmm.
will read, passages from a book, but if you don't know the book, you're not. And I don't usually know the books, so I don't usually get it. But it's just kind of like his own personal interests, I think. So I think a lot of it is very personal to him, and you have to do a lot of research after the movie to figure out what every little thing or reference or meaning behind the characters is or relates to.
Yeah, definitely. Um, and one thing as you were kind of describing the dynamic between the two, it it kind of reminded me of a movie that there are certain parallels now that I think about it, and it was one that you and I actually covered, Matthew, and that is Badlands. And do you kind of see some of the parallels between this and Badlands? I mean, at least from a plot perspective, but slightly from a dynamic perspective, although the women are a little bit different in that avenue, but I guess what attracts them is probably similar.
I 100% agree. I actually that was one of the movies I listed just like personally. I was like thinking about what movies that this definitely directly inspired, and that was one of them. Movies like that or Bonnie and Clyde. Kind of where they're just kind of going around committing crimes, and there's also a romance aspect to it,
Mm-hmm.
and there's not much of a plot. And then they also Malick also used a lot of, I would say, you could tell after you see Breathless that there's a lot of inspiration in Badlands from that movie, or from inspiration from Breathless, I meant to say, after you've seen both of them. Just the whole kind of, I guess I could say, tone of the movie. It's Malick's, it's his auteur, touch or whatever, stamp or whatever you want to say. He has his. You could tell it's a Malick film, but you could see how much it was inspired by, or it probably wouldn't have been made if this movement never happened.
Absolutely. Matthew, do you have any parting thoughts with this? And if you would like to rate the movie as well, I would love to hear what you rated it to.
Yeah. Final thoughts would just be, this is definitely, if you like it or hate it, I think this is a must watch. Just to help, if you want to get into film, or you're interested in like the meaning behind stuff, or the history of it. I think this is absolutely an essential movie to watch. Just as much as people say like Citizen Kane is, this is definitely one of those big landmark movies. But I rated it initially eight or 4 out of 5 stars, and then on my second viewing, I rated it 9, because I appreciated it more. I knew a lot of the references as well after watching movies like the Humphrey Bogart reference, where he just kind of sees him on the street and loves him, and is like worshiping him for a few seconds. Just things like that, because I know actors and things more. It made me enjoy the movie more, I guess I could say. Because
Yeah.
I felt a little lost the first time watching it, but it was still enjoyable.
I guess one thing I will say is I was so unfamiliar with the references, I didn't even really realize I was missing the
No, yeah,
references.
that'll happen, and that's what people say. You don't have to understand them. It's still a great movie without them. But then with them, or understanding them this time, I was watching more carefully. I got more. I just got more from it, because I guess I knew what to expect. The first time it's just kind of like a shock, and you feel like a lot of stuff is being thrown at you. Um, but I don't know. This is one of the only movies I really actually enjoyed more on a rewatch. Most of the time, my favorites are, I love them the first time, and this one I definitely enjoyed it more the second time.
So I, like you, gave this one this was my first watch, a 4 out of 5. And I think it's important to say that there might be a preconception that you have to be like really into film to truly be able to appreciate this, but I don't find that to be the case. I think I came into it open-minded, which helps, but I think that it's something that you will likely kind of feel like, okay, this isn't going to be my bread and butter, and I think you would be pleasantly surprised with how much you come out liking it, because at least that was my experience. Because it almost sounded like it would be too highbrow for me, but it was surprisingly accessible, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm surprised you enjoyed it so much. I mean, it can be seen as pretentious, for obvious reasons. But yeah, you really, I mean, people that gatekeep it are gonna say, you gotta really understand French movies to really get him. But that's not really true. I mean, it helps get it more, but there's so much packed in there and you can really, if you go in with an open mind, I think is the most important part to enjoying him. Because people that don't are just gonna say, or they're usually gonna conclude that it's just a bunch of pretentious crap.
Yeah, and I don't think that could be further from the truth. And going into the next movie we covered, Vivre sa vie, which translates to live my life. Am I correct on that, Matthew?
I think it's My Life to Live. I mean,
Yes.
I've actually in French, but I don't. That was a few years ago.
I
I
think
don't know really. It's hard.
I think you yeah, I'm pretty positive after you said that I think you are definitely correct. But this one, so you or I watched Breathless, thought I was maybe had picked up some of the nuances or had a handle on Godard's style, and I should have known better because this does use certain aspects that you see in Breathless, but it's a very different film than Breathless, especially with how it is kind of paced out and broken down into, I believe, 12 parts, which was definitely unique and really quite cool, I thought.
Yeah, that's something he does. He if you watch more, you'll realize he does that in almost every movie. He breaks it into like sub chapters and he names them like usually just like Vivus, very long kind of descriptive chapter names. Um, it's just it's interesting, kind of like reading a long paper or something. I don't know. It's it's unique. It's pretty creative.
Yeah, it's almost like it was adapted from a novel.
Yeah, yeah, and Lars von Trier, another director, he's the only other person I've seen who does that a lot. But I think Godard had to start that because I had not seen that before 1960.
Yeah, I think I picked up on that from a house that Jack built, and I really quite like that movie. In fact, I think I'm gonna have to rewatch that because I don't know why my initial rating of that was far too low. But Von Trier, I mean, I feel like the list of people who have made movies and were inspired by French New Wave, it's probably endless. I just can't imagine being a director and not at least dabbling in this kind of film wave, just because it's so unique and it's very appealing for the time period. It's in stark contrast to what you see even other auteurs at the time. Like it's very different from what you would see from a Kurosawa, and something I kind of want to bring up and maybe get your commentary on is it feels kind of more modern for some reason, and I don't know if that's just because of its inspiration. But does that kind of track with you as well?
Oh yeah, yes, and even when you go back, it still feels modern and unique, which is super interesting about it. And I noticed that when I was watching it again. And I honestly just think it's because, like I've said a few times now, like he, it was just kind of the beginning, I guess, of this. Uh, it was like I don't know, I don't have really a metaphor for it, but this is just like the start of so many inspirations for different directors, especially in the '70s in America too. Like, the '70s might be my favorite decade for movies in general, and a lot of like the what people would call the new Hollywood. I think the '70s big directors were really like directly inspired by the French New Wave and Godard movies, and that's why you kind of have like if you compare a 70 like a typical even American '70s movie with an American '50s movie or '40s movie, they're completely different. You like Apocalypse Now versus like a classic like noir film or something with the '40s, or like It's a Wonderful Life, or just like a all those movies. It's just a stark contrast. For example, Apocalypse Now, is directed on. It seems like it looks on location, just like all the Godard movies. Whereas a lot of the old classics, you can tell they're all sets. They might make them look, like they're in a location, but they're all lit sets, and they're all, filmed in Hollywood in a certain way with certain lighting, and it's just very. I think it feels so modern because it's had such a huge impact on almost all modern cinema, whether people realize it, whether even a director has seen it or not, because what they might be inspired by was probably inspired by Godard. So you can just kind of go down the chain of inspirations, and a lot of times it just leads back to him.
Yeah, and one of the things that is really gripping, and I think I want to make the point very clear that Godard's dialogue is one of my favorite things about his movies. And I think the way I would try to describe it is it has the charm of what you expect from snappy 50s dialogue while having a more naturalistic feel to it. And I think that was kind of why I loved it. And you see stuff like that that's super duper prevalent in like Tarantino films. And I feel like maybe that is, one of the inspirations for him as a writer. Do you feel like that's, how would you describe the dialogue, I guess?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So the dialogue to me, and I was really trying to pay attention a lot to it this other time around. It's a lot of it, like, for example, like he changes it up in a way that makes you kind of think about film as an art form itself. So, like, for example, when she's having a conversation with her friend about becoming a prostitute. So they're talking, and the camera's kind of lingering on them, and then it kind of zooms in on her, or on the main character, Anna Karina's character, as she's telling her about it, and then all of a sudden it goes into like this montage, and she's basically like, how much do I charge? And then like it turns into this very weird I'm sorry, I think this is when she's talking to, I think I got it wrong. She's talking to the guy who is like the pimp or whatever.
Yeah.
And she starts asking him these questions, and he kind of starts responding in this odd like tone that sounds like he's like answering a question from a student in a classroom.
Yeah.
And then so it's just like this barrage of questions as the montage is going on over and over. So he does these very interesting like experimental things like that, for example. And then at the end, another really like heavy dialogue part is, I think it's chapter 11 or 10. It's near the end. And part of the chapter title is The Philosopher, and it's because she's talking to that older man, and he just starts going off on all this philosophy rant about tons of different, big questions, tons of different aspects of philosophy, different fields, and he just kind of throws it all at you. And at least the first time I watched it, I was like, am I not getting it? Or am I supposed to internalize all these things right now? Because he just like referenced like a ton of different philosophers and different philosophical ideas. And then he starts talking about like the Three Musketeers book and literature and all this and it's just kind of all thrown at you in a few minutes. And it actually lasts way longer than at least I felt like it did. Because the whole time I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to, and I think that's the way, he's challenging the audience as well. Is he's trying to make you think about what's being said, and that, and to me, it can be off-putting, but it made me more interested and get more, question more about, oh, what's he talking about here? What are they talking about here? This sounds really interesting. It kind of facilitates, I guess, more of an active interest, I would say, in the dialogue itself. And the characters kind of have this back and forth that's mostly just people would call it a Socratic debate back and forth is kind of what he opens. He like creates a space in his movies for these characters to have like this Socratic type debate that just kind of comes out of nowhere, and that kind of that always like I like that. It's no other director really does that in that way.
Yeah, I mean, and it's definitely done very differently, but it's reminiscent of Tarkovsky. However, like, but that is more or less the entirety of his dialogue, as opposed to let's set the placemats for this kind of grand philosophical debate. I'm glad you brought that section up, though, because that was my favorite part of this movie. And also, I think you highlighted a scene that I underappreciated, but where those questions are kind of asked on the ins and out of prostitution. That was a stellar scene as well. It almost kind of felt like like in heist movies where they go to the drawing board, they're like, well, how are we going to get in? We're going to take the vent shaft and then we're going to go, you know what I'm saying? Like it kind of had that nice give and take to it. It's so far ahead of its time in that way. But yeah, that kind of conversation, I was like entranced by it and just, I lost the plot literally while they were talking about it, and I was just entertained by what they were saying. And I do think there's something to be said by that I mean at the end of the day, that is what we're aiming for, right?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I think that's his whole goal, to do with, or to have the audience think exactly what you just described. Because he really there is a plot, but it's so unfocused, and I think he wants to steer people away from thinking about it. Because like he'll put it there, like he loves noir films, and they're almost all have a noir aspect, like a crime movie aspect to them, even when they don't really need to. You know what I mean? And at the same time, like this is a movie about prostitution. It doesn't even seem like a dark movie, even though it can be a really dark subject. You don't ever see it happening. You kind of just see her and her clients talking in goofy ways to each other, or just goofy because you would never expect it. You would never expect them to just start talking about, or her client to be reading Edgar Allan Poe and start reading an entire page out of the book. Like it's just, it's like so like funny, random stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah, and the only time it really kind of feels like it's brushing against like the dark, seedy nature of the content that we're talking about, it's like it is kind of almost described through a loss of interest by our main character. Like she seems to be very detached from what's going on, and that can be a commentary on how that affects people who are in these situations. But I don't know if that was maybe intentional too, where it's like this is just the narrative that is keeping this story contained, less as the pure focus of it.
Yeah. I didn't. To me, I would like when I rewatched it, I just kind of laughed a little, and I was like, I didn't notice this. Like for example, when her first time, like her first time as a prostitute, she, like the guy starts kissing her, and she just kind of says, "I don't want to," but then she just kind of sits there with a super sad, disinterested type of look, and he just like keeps trying to kiss her, but he does it so much that it's just kind of ridiculous, and it's not like you don't think of it as it doesn't, you don't feel bad for her because it doesn't seem real, and all the other times you see her doing that, she just looks completely disinterested in her face most of the time, and she's just kind of going through the motions. And I don't know if of the exact intention behind all that, or if that's another thing that he's using to try and put focus away from the plot, or I really don't know. But it is definitely something I noticed, and it might just be also because he's like, again, like, really doesn't want us to feel for the character, and that might be part of it.
Yeah, and the ending of this film felt more kind of slapdash than even Breathless, because it's so very unexpected. It kind of comes out of left field, just introduces characters that I think it ties in very strongly to what you were describing previously about how his endings are much a commentary on kind of the movie as a whole, as opposed to trying to be that impactful ending.
Yeah, no, it was. I didn't even remember the ending for this one, for the rewatch, and then when I saw it, I was like, yeah, that's what I thought happened, because it kind of, like I said, you watch more, like, he does that so much, and I think he's playing off the, I guess, typical, in almost all movies, there's a structure, an act structure, and then there's usually a struggle, there's a climax, and then there's an ending and a resolution. And that's just goes for not even movies, just stories in general, usually. And this, it just, because all of a sudden in the last like 3 minutes, she's she's just picked up by that group of people. You don't even, or I didn't even really know who they were at first, because I didn't remember the ending. And then you still don't. I mean, you figure, they're asking for money. These are the people that are running the prostitution ring. You can kind of figure that out. But you don't really know why she's being killed. I mean, maybe it's there, but I didn't even catch it on the rewatch. It just seems out of place, and it just seems like he's just straight up rejecting that whole, this is how you should end the story, rules that have been kind of set through storytelling and movies and books and whatnot. And he's just kind of throwing it all. He's like, oh, and the character just dies at the end, and that's it.
And
you know,
the most impressive aspect, Matt, is that it doesn't leave you with like a sour taste in your mouth afterwards. At least for my experience.
No, yeah, I felt okay with it. Yeah. It's just kind of like, okay, this fits the movie, and then it really makes you think, or at least at the first time, it really started to make me think. This he's making movies in such a different way than I had seen, and even though I had seen movies that were obviously inspired by the French New Wave, I just didn't realize it. Because none are so in your face as these two movies we've talked about in terms of like them being French New Wave.
Yeah. Here's a question I would like to ask you, because I think both movies play into this. I think the movie we're talking about now, Vivre, maybe is a little bit more indicative of it, but I want to get your overall thoughts. Do you think Godard, was he kind of like I guess, fatalist type director early on? Was that something prevalent in his filmography, or do you think that the kind of rejection of plot and disinterest in it is what kind of gives off that type of vibe?
Well, I would say, in terms of like all his movies being made, he is actively rejecting plot early on. But then as the years go by, he actually took a long break from making movies for like 9 years, and then when he returned, he really focused on. I mean, he kind of has different stages, and I'm not like an expert, like a super expert on all the stages, but I kind of know a rough thing, or a rough timeline. He kind of goes from like this rejection and this revolution of movies and creating like a new type of movie, and then he gets and I told you this over Discord message. He gets really political as it goes on, and he starts making movies that are just directly about communism, socialism, and it's way more of a commentary on those things. And it's even more apparent as the time goes on in terms of his political movies, like that they are that this is like not this is more like a lecture kind of in a movie or an essay in a movie format than it is any type of typical film where you're going to feel any sort of escape or follow any sort of plot. And some people really don't like his later movies, and some people enjoy them. I like them. I enjoy them, and I think he was incredibly creative even as it kept going on or as time went on. He's made a lot of interesting things that aren't just political later on, but they're just kind of like, as I was describing earlier, like the Image book. They're kind of like cinematic essays, I guess, with spliced together clips and commentary about movies.
Yeah, I certainly can't wait to explore Godard more. What were your final thoughts of this film?
So this is definitely one of the first ones I watched from him, or maybe it was definitely in the first three or four.
So, we were kind of talking about your final thoughts on this one. What were your final thoughts, and what did you rank this film?
Yeah, so on the first watch and the rewatch, I gave it a 4 out of 5. I really like this one. I think it's definitely the perfect, I guess, film to watch after Breathless. But I think there's a few more that you could also watch. But it's got a short run time, but it packs a lot in there. I really enjoy this. I think this is the first film where I think I saw Anna Karina act as an actress, and I thought she did a really good job. Just kind of portraying this character, even though it's a character you're not supposed to like. She does a really good job at acting how Godard needs her to in order to get his point in the movie. So I think this is kind of, I don't know if this is her breakout role. I can't recall, but she just gives a really good performance in this, and overall I think this is it's not the landmark film that Breathless was, but it's definitely a really good movie to watch to get a better understanding of if you'll like Godard's other films.
Yeah, for sure. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 as well. I think I might have slight preference for Breathless, but this is one that is very enjoyable, and I think its narrative structure was definitely, it was ripe for a film like this, and really helps in the way that the story's told. So overall, it's a really good movie, and one that I would definitely recommend. And same kind of preface that I said for Breathless, like it's a lot more accessible than you would probably expect. So, I mean, if you have an inclination to take it, I would say just jump at it, because I think it's you can enjoy this for sure.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you can also, not that his early movies are interchangeable, but they kind of are all super similar, and you can kind of look at all of them and be like, and pick what you're interested in. Like Contempt is more of a romance story. Alphaville's kind of like his take on a noir crime movie, and this is kind of more about. I mean, it is about prostitution and just that whole kind of cultural phenomenon in France. At the time was probably, I don't really know much about that in France at the time, but it was definitely existed, and I don't think he's trying to make a statement on prostitution per se, but he kind of has different things he uses as his, like main focuses in different movies. But he kind of uses them all, like I said earlier, as a space for the characters to uh, debate or talk about his different interests and things like that. So
Yeah, it's really it's the hook that brings you in, and he's able to go so much kind of above and beyond the subject matter, and I think that's what makes him great, especially from like a writing standpoint.
yeah, I agree definitely.
Well, Matt, do you have, I guess, any other movies by Godard or involved within the French New Wave that you would like to kind of touch on to close out this video?
Sure. I'll just give so a few um, French New Wave directors I really like, and everyone kind of has their own preferences. The people that really enjoy this type of movie. I like Romer or Romer. I might butcher these names. Eric Romer, Rivette, uh, Godard, of course, and I like Louis Mao or Louis Mao. I don't know how you say his first name. Those are kind of my favorite French New Wave directors. Oh, and also Alan Rene, if you would consider him one, but his name's spelled like Resnais. I think I said it. But and then in terms of Godard movies, he makes so many movies. So, like, I used to just if I and they're usually around 90 minutes too, which is awesome because you can watch more. Um, I used to just throw on a movie of his, if I didn't know what to watch. But my other favorites are Contempt, Alphaville, The Image Book, and then some of his later movies I really like. Well, Weekend, it's debated whether it's later, but I like Weekend, and I like this movie called Hail Mary by him, and I also really liked King Lear and Two or Three Things I Know About Her. So as I said, he's made a lot, and you've got to really watch a lot by him to get more of what he's about. And there's still like at least 5 to 10 movies I haven't even watched by him that are considered great by a lot of people. So I still have some to watch. But yeah, you can definitely really get into him and kind of just watch his movies for a while. And I think if you like Breathless and Vivre, you're gonna like his other stuff too. So
I look forward to it because kind of the way that you were describing Godard, where if you didn't know what to watch, that guy for me was Bergman for a while. So I do definitely think that Godard is going to be thrown into that mix, though, just because, like you said, I mean, it's very difficult to find people who can be so impactful in such little runtime, and that's obviously a plus. If you don't have, if you have limited time, and it's like, yeah, I want to watch something good, but don't know what to watch, and having someone like that is definitely a huge plus.
yep, yeah, yeah.
Well, Matthew, I very much appreciate you coming on. This was a very exciting episode to do, and I'm glad that we got to talk about an exciting kind of cinematic wave, something that I had no experience to prior to watching these movies, but I feel like you definitely kind of showed me something very unique and interesting. I'm really glad you did, and thank you for coming on, Matt. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I always enjoy doing this. I have fun, just talking about movies, and I like it if I can influence, I guess, people to watch certain things, or I tell someone about something and they really like it. That always makes me happy, and it's kind of just my goal, spreading the love for movies of all different kinds. So I'm glad you liked it. This is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone watching, thank you for joining us. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And also, if you liked Matt's kind of thoughts, takes, and reviews, his Letterboxd is going to be linked down below. So definitely check him out because he watches a lot of stuff that might be new to you, and if you are a very kind of experienced cinematic viewer, he's someone that you can reach out to and kind of comment back and forth if you have tastes that not a lot of people like. You'll have someone to talk to about these movies like French New Wave, Dogma films. You definitely have a very, very broad taste and are very well versed in cinema, Matt. So, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who would love to chat with you about that, and I'm glad that I have the opportunity to chat with you about these movies. That's for sure.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And yeah, I don't dislike a lot of movies, so I tend to like stuff instead of dislike it. So yeah, if people have unique, tastes or movies they like, I can almost always appreciate people's interests and talk to them. So yeah,
That's definitely like a good trait to have
yeah.
with anything really. So, and that is all from us. We will catch y'all on the flippity floop. Thank you. We'll catch you next time. Bye.